What's poppin'? What's poppin'? How's everybody doing? Welcome back to another episode of Life According to Rick. Now, I just want to wish everybody a happy new year. This is the first episode of 2026. I hope that everybody had an amazing, entering the new year with your loved ones. And, that this year is about, you know, reflecting and, kind of making it a better year than 2025, which is kind of like the ultimate goal every year, right? When the new year enters, we kind of like reflect on how the year was, what we can improve, to kind of make it a better year the upcoming year. But we're not fortune tellers or, we can't foresee the future, but we can only hope that, that it is a better year than the year prior. So how was everybody's New Year's? Like, what did you guys do? Did you stay in? Did you go out and celebrate? Us, on the other hand, it was kind of like the same thing as New Year's Eve. I mean, Christmas Eve, sorry. Um, had to work till like 6 o'clock, and I kind of had plans, like, granted, we were gonna stay indoors, but I wanted to kind of like, enter the new year, kind of like turn up a little bit, what I'm saying, in the house, I wanted to like get dressed up, you know, how us Dominicans say in Spanish, la pinta for the para la sala, you get the drip for the living room, to kind of enter the new year and whatever. But we had other plans, what I'm saying, things that didn't play out the way that I wanted them to. So after I got off work, me and Harlem had to go run a couple errands. What I'm saying? By the time I got home, it was already like 8:30 ish and whatever, and he was just being restless. And so, you know, we was trying to get him to go to sleep. He finally fell asleep like around 11:30 ish, right? So me and my wife went downstairs and we kind of just turned on the TV and waited for the ball to drop, and then we called it a night. So, um, it was very low key. We ordered some Chinese food. We got some sushi. We ate, so it was chill, not like how I wanted it to be, but it was a okay turnout. Me and my wife, we're very much polar opposites. I'm more like the turn up guy, like Mr. Fun guy. I wanna turn up, and she's the more low key homebody. You know what I'm saying? She just wants to chill. But as we enter this new year, I want to take a moment to kind of reflect on, where I've been, where I'm heading in the new year, focusing on my growth and healing. The past year has definitely been a journey of growth. You know, um, we faced challenges in our marriage, and, it's been a process of healing and rebuilding trust. Now, as I've mentioned before, my wife and I have been together for overall 10 years. We've been married for almost 5 years. And, you know, as I touch base on all of this, I'm going to be very transparent with y'all. And, this episode is going to be very much about accountability, and, making poor choices in life, and, um, I very much am human and I'm going to make mistakes. But again, like I said, it's about accountability, you know, taking responsibility for the choices that I've made and, moving forward and get into that good space. No marriage is perfect. And you can ask anybody that's been married for 20, 30 plus years, that in that longevity that there hasn't been no ups and downs. if they tell you that their marriage has been perfect, that is a rare anomaly, but it can also be a lie. Because I feel like no marriage is perfect. There's always going to be trials and tribulations in marriage and in relationships in general. Even if you're not married and you've been in a long relationship, there's always going to be some ups and downs, disagreements. So it's just one of those things where it's all about getting through those humps, right? And, just working at it as a couple. When we take those vows, you become a unit, you become one, right? Through sickness and health, till death do us part. And I have broken that trust, with my wife, due to infidelity issues, something that I'm not very proud of. But, like I said, this is like my healing era. So I feel like speaking on it, it can definitely resonate with a lot of people because it's something that's very common in relationships, unfortunately. But I just wanted to kind of just clear the air. My wife and I right now are currently in couples therapy, and I feel like we're kind of working into getting into that good space, right? Working on our marriage and working on reaching that longevity, as a couple. And like I said, I'm human. I've apologized. You know, um, I'm definitely putting the work, into rebuilding that trust, that I've broken, that this is something that I've caused. So, we're gonna get there. And it's just one of those things where I definitely wanted to speak on it because, like I said, it's very common. We see this a lot, and it can be on either parties, right? Male or female, but it still doesn't feel good, and not making any excuses, but I feel like a lot of it has to do with things that I've dealt with in the past, my upbringing has to do part of it, in a sense. And I don't think I ever really truly learned or embraced how to love somebody in that sense. The love that I received from my grandmother was more like that nurturing love. So naturally, I'm that provider, that protector. My wife will tell you that, my love language is act of service, like I cater to her and, do little things that she likes, or, I would get up in the morning and make her breakfast and stuff like that. But like I said, it's a work in progress and we're gonna get there. One of the things that we struggle with in our relationship is communication. And that's something that I'm truly working on because I have always had issues opening up and, speaking on things, and when you have those tough conversations, I kind of like shut down, right? And by me shutting down is like we don't come to a resolution, which then things get swept under the rug and, nothing truly gets resolved. So it's still festering and it's eventually gonna pop up and, you have to have those hard conversations. So I'm definitely learning, to communicate more. So we've been talking a lot more, being more transparent with one another without, getting upset with what's being said. So I feel like that's a huge milestone and a huge step into working on fixing the issues that we have. And to keep it a buck, she could have bounced a long time ago. She could have been like, F you, I'm not dealing with your tomfoolery anymore, and told me to kick rocks. but she hasn't. She's still sticking through it. We are definitely working together, not against each other, to keep our family together. We definitely don't want to damage our son. I definitely don't want to damage our son because I know what that feels like to have your parents divorce and, what comes behind all of it. So I definitely don't want to make those same mistakes. So the fact that she's giving me grace and is still here, and we doing the couples therapy and trying to get through all of this, is it says a lot, speaks volume. She's definitely my best friend, and regardless of my mistakes and the things that I've done, I'm definitely working on being a better person for myself, but also to be a better husband, a better father, because it all plays a hand together, right? But we all go through things in life, in relationships, and if if that person that you're with truly matters to you, then you work at it, if not, if you don't see like a future um with that person, then definitely let them go, especially if you don't have any ties. Like when there's children involved, it gets messy, it gets complicated. But I feel like when you're married, you take those vows, like that's serious. And I've come to the realization that I do want to be with my wife and I want my family. So that's why we're working at getting to that space, you know what I mean? So that way we can push forward and look back and say like we made it. We got through this, and you know that's very important. Definitely for the new year, we are on that rebuilding stage. Parenting a toddler has definitely put a damper on things, and not saying that it's a bad thing because our son is a blessing, but we are trying to find that balance, to make time for each other, you know, date nights and, all the good stuff, right? The little things, laying in bed, having a conversation, and just laughing. We kind of been getting back to that, recently, once Harlem goes to bed, kind of just lay in bed and, just talk about whatever, and just being present with each other in that moment. It definitely makes the bond stronger. You rebuild that trust, and definitely we're gonna keep working at that. And like I said, date nights, which can be a little difficult when you have a toddler. So we're gonna see how we work around that. But we're definitely going to make those necessary changes for the new year. I'm not one to do resolutions because resolutions, it can be something that you might set for yourself. And if you don't meet that resolution or that goal, then it's like a disappointment. And I don't really want to get into those, disappointments, right? So we kind of just play it along and take it day by day and definitely focus on the important things, So we're trying to be more present with each other, and I think we're heading in the right direction. And to those of y'all that are listening and this is resonating with you, I hope that this is definitely helping or can help you in a sense, right? As far as like my experience, I can't speak for other people's experiences. People go through different situations, right? Behind closed doors, we don't know what's going on or with people's relationships, right? From the outside looking in, things may look good and, they may not be good. So, but definitely communication is important. And like I said, that's been one of our main issues, especially on my part, because obviously I've had communication issues, as far as opening up and, shutting down. So when those hard conversations come up, you know, take it all in and, listen. Don't listen to react, process what's being said and then, build the conversation in that way. So, with that being said, for the new year, my goal isn't perfection because obviously nobody's perfect, right? My goal is progress. I want to show up more for Harlem, for my wife especially, be more honest. I definitely want to do things right this year and definitely work on getting in a better place with my wife, and building on our marriage and like I said, work on that longevity, for us to look back and say, that was a bump in the road and we got over it, you know. So if you're listening to this episode and you're struggling in your relationship and you've messed up and you're carrying guilt, trying to figure out how to move forward, you're not alone. Definitely not alone. Growth doesn't mean pretending that you didn't fail. It just means that you own it and choosing to be better, right? Holding ourselves accountable and, learning from those mistakes and growing and moving forward. I can honestly say that I definitely feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulder. This hasn't been easy for me to say out loud, to share with other people, but it definitely shows the vulnerability and the growth as a person within myself. And I just hope that it helps other people. That's the ultimate goal. Apart from me working on myself and healing and a lot of things that I've been working on, I definitely hope that that this resonates with certain people, to get over those humps or whatever it is that you may be going through in your relationships. I definitely want to thank everybody for tuning in today, for taking your time in your day to listen to this episode. Let's start the year right. Let's hope for an amazing 2026. And I will catch you guys next week. And we doing it, people. This is episode 6. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, like, damn, already 6 weeks, talking to y'all and everything like that, and it feels amazing. It feels amazing, and I'm enjoying where this is going. And y'all know the vibes, man. This is your boy Rick. I will catch you guys next time.